So this is going to be another concept theory, really. This is going to be another one that I don't necessarily have a lot of evidence for. And I've noticed that. A lot of my Deltarune theories seem to be more concept-based than, like, these solid things I can prove from the context of the game. But I do think they're cool concepts that I do want to bring up, just in case they do end up being true. Um, so I've kind of considered the idea, what if Krampus is the next main villain of Deltarune? And I could kind of like talk about how that would work. So there's a big possibility that Chapter 6 is going to be Christmas themed. In fact, it seems like what Chapter 6 is going to be is it's going to start out in like a Christmas themed dark world, but then the roaring is going to happen in the middle of that adventure, which will kick off the climax, right? That's what it seems to be. We do like a normal adventure for a while, and then we start the roaring. And I think what could be a better transition between a Christmas-themed adventure and Hell on Earth Day than the Christmas demon himself, Krampus. Now, I got to thinking, how could Krampus work in Deltarune? I think it could just be Eram. So, we've seen a little bit of Eram. He was like this little 8-bit dude in the mini games. It's heavily implied that he is the Shadow Mantle, although that's not entirely certain. And it also is very likely that Eram is the red headband that Chris used to wear. So I'm kind of wondering, follow along with this. What if Eram is the Shadow Mantle? What if he is the red headband? And at some point in the past, Eram told Chris to do something bad. And I feel like this would be an interesting parallel, right? You have Eram the demon, who told Chris to do bad things in the past. The small red object that told Chris to do stuff that Chris didn't want to do. So let's say Eram told Chris to do something very, very bad. So Chris tried to get rid of Eram. Chris threw the red headband in a trash can in Noelle's house or something. You know, that might be fitting. Maybe Chris just hid the red headband somewhere in Noelle's house. Because, you know, if like Carol found the headband in the trash, Carol was just going to return that to Chris. But if Chris put the headband in a place somewhere that neither the Dreamers nor the Holidays would think to look for it, just hid it somewhere where it was out of sight, out of mind, and no one would ever find it, until a dark world is made in Noelle's house and Eram can run amok again, right? That's something that I think could be interesting. Now, it is implied that Eram is the boss of the Friendlings. So we learned a little bit more about the Friends from Chapter 5. When you go back to Mew Mew's shop, she'll say, cats aren't super smart, but they are super strong. And when they find a target, they don't give up chasing it until like they find it or until they get bored. Cats can be very mean, very nasty creatures. I knew someone who had a whole hunting pack of cats, and that was scary. That was a very scary someone, and a lot of people would do a lot to get away from this individual. They could even change their appearance or go into hiding. And so I think, we sort of have this theme of the secret bosses teasing the next chapter boss. So Jevil mentions the Queen, and then Spampton mentions TV World Antenna. Chapter 4 was like a very weird concept. I guess we didn't necessarily get allusions to Gerson. But the Shadow Mantle minigame was Dragon Blazers, which was based off of Lord of the Hammer. So I guess in a weird roundabout way, it mentioned Lord of the Hammer. Dragon Blazers mentions Lord of the Hammer, which mentions Gerson, I guess. And then Gerson mentions the field of pink and gold, which is the field of flowery, you know. Um, and then Pink mentions the cat master, or whatever. So I feel like it could be very interesting. It would sort of tie up the loose thread of ERAM. It would basically show us who ERAM is in the actual game. I also think ERAM would have a history with Chris and would also know a lot of the bad things Chris is doing. Now, it does seem like ERAM is part of the Shelter Gang. ERAM is someone who does work for the Shelter Gang. Because ERAM says we both have work to do. We both have work to do for Gaster, presumably. So, I think that this being the main villain of the chapter could tell us a little bit more about the conspiracy, a little bit more about, like, Chris's, like, whatever Chris is doing, you know? I feel like this would tie really well with, like, my own theory of the Roaring Delta, Unholy Trinity, whatever you want to call it, of, like, Gaster, the Knight, and then, like, the third one could be ERAM, like, the boss of the cats. I feel like that would fit really well. Because, like, the mantle, maybe if, like, the shadow mantle goes over someone, it can, like, take control of them. And so I'm kind of wondering, what if the chapter boss, the way ERAM speaks to us is that, like, the shadow mantle is sort of, like, over one of the friends, and so ERAM speaks through the mouth of one of the friends, and this like device friend, this could be like the Krampus, right? Like basically being forced to do bad things by the demon that's like controlling them, right? I feel like that could be really interesting. I also feel like if ERAM is one of the closest characters to Gaster, like the Knight's probably close to Gaster as well, but the Knight doesn't really speak. ERAM's a character who could probably speak and could probably like set up the idea of Gaster, and maybe Gaster is this big creature in deepest darkness that everyone's afraid of, right? Like if the roaring happens, then this terrifying creature in deep darkness will come out and wreak havoc. And so, like, the whole thing is that why people want to stop the prophecy from happening is because Gaster's just too strong. Gaster is the final boss, and he's like this big, scary thing in the deepest darkness. But of course, if ERAM and the Knight are both working for Gaster, they're trying to get down to like the deepest darkness to sort of like free Gaster, get him out of there. I feel like ERAM would just be a perfect villain to tie together the sort of like a lot of the remaining plot threads of the game and a lot of the teases that we've been given over the years. Like, you could say that Gaster's not really a plot point that's been set up yet, but Gaster is something that was teased. Fans who were paying attention would have noticed that Toby was using Gasterisms with this new character, which is like the sort of like voice at the beginning of the game. I feel like if ERAM is the main boss of Chapter 6, it will tie everything together in a nice bow into like that sort of transition between like normal adventures and endgame stuff that we needed, right? I feel like that would go a long way. I think it's a cool idea for a character. Is that everything I wanted to say? That might be everything I wanted to say. Um, I don't know. A lot of this theory is sort of pieced together from like some old theories I made. Um, and this one was also kind of unscripted as well. That's why I kept repeating a lot of the things I wanted to say. But yeah, the Christmas Demon. Main villain of Chapter 6. That's sort of the prediction that I'm locking in. I'm not the first one to say that Eram's probably going to be the main villain of Chapter 6. But at the same time, I feel like I like the ways I expanded on this idea. With like my own understanding of the Deltarune story, and my own predictions on how the game's going to go, tying that together with the idea of Eram being the next main boss, it kind of paints this interesting picture, I guess. I'd like to hear a fan theme on Krampus, if possible. This version of Krampus, I guess. I mean, that would make me feel fulfilled.